And hello again. Welcome to this next lecture in our series of Flutter lectures. Yeah. What are we going to talk about today? Well, the topic for today is state management in Flutter. So Flutter is a declarative framework, and in this case that means that it's built in a way that it's possible to redraw just parts of the screen. When something is using the user interface, like pressing a button, the user interface is redrawn, and that has in imperative programming been just like calling a method like setText, for example, for changing the text of some widget somewhere. Using mutator methods then to change stuff. In Flutter, it's been optimized for doing this, but by updating the entire state and doing that efficiently throughout the application. That also means that it will only update the parts that will actually need to be redrawn. We have short-lived and long-lived state, and short-lived is something that we are going to look at today, namely when we press a button or we type something into a text field and so on, and they will not survive till the next start of the application. And then there's long-lived, like persistent stuff that we want in databases and so on, that we could handle. But today we are going to look at the short-lived state of an application. And the way to do that is to use stateful widgets. So far we've mainly just looked at the stateless widgets, but the stateful widgets are able to handle states that change during the lifetime of the application. In your favorite IDE, you can just start typing, for example, stateful, and you will be able to tab complete that by just pressing the tab key and just write a name for whatever you like to create the state for. But we'll see that when we do that, we actually create two classes, one for the stateful widget and one for the state. So that means that a stateful widget has a state. The stateful widget itself is immutable, but the corresponding state that we create is mutable. This will be easier to understand when we see this. When we create the state or the stateful widget, we will get something similar to what we can see over here. We have some class here, myPageWidget, which extends stateful widget. This one has basically just one part, an override from the stateful widget for create state, which will return, as we can see over here, a state for the myPageWidget. And this state is contained in another private class that's called myPageWidgetState. And that's what I mean with there being two classes created, one for the stateful widget and one for the state, which will be called _myPageWidgetState. The book and some other sources on the internet will use an older notation for doing this, but I advise you to just use this way of doing it, because this more clearly shows that we have a separation between state and the widget itself. And we'll see that in this example, but we'll wait just a second. Managing the state is by inheriting from a state widget, and this one has a build method just as any other widget. And it is in this one that we build up the user interface, but also we have the ability to set a number of variables as ordinary .code. So in for example this one, we create the counter, which is a private field, so int counter is 0, and then we have a method increment counter, which will use a call to set state, and this set state is what's actually making a change to a state. So it's unfortunately not enough in this increment counter to say that we want to increment the counter by 1. We actually need to have this inside of the set state method that we see over here. So it is a call to set state that will repaint the screen. And this can be made, for example, from a button. And I assure you, soon there will be an example, but we need to go through all of this. So in order to do this, we need to look at buttons. And there are a great many different kinds of buttons. The most ordinary ones are the text button, the elevated button, and the outline button. Previously, we've also had something called a raised button, but no, you should not use that. I say that again with my deepest voice. No, don't use raised button. And it's quite possible that it is completely deprecated by now as well. But we still have floating action buttons and icon buttons and so on. They work mainly the same. They have a method called onPressed, which will need to make a call to something then that changes the state. The method that we saw previously, for example. But it also has a text or an icon or something like that. But with that, we are going to rush forward into an example, namely this one. And you saw the much better transition than previously. I've learned stuff. This is the application. We are going to have a counter app, not entirely dissimilar from the standard application, but in this one we can go up and we can go down like this, which makes it a little bit better. We'll start from the beginning. We have the normal stuff for a stateless widget over here, which just creates the stuff. Then we have this counter page. And this counter page is what we see over here. It's going to contain all the stuff that we see. And it extends the stateful widget instead. And in this, we have this create state method, which is going to handle the state itself for us. But it also says that this one will return the counter state, which is a new class, this one over here, which, as we'll see down here, looks like a normal stateless widget, but it is actually a state widget of counter page type, this one over here. So that's the connection between them. And in this one, we can have stuff like this counter, which is basically a state that we are holding on to. We have the increment and decrement methods, which increment and decrement the value of counter, and we see that it needs to be inside of this set state for it, to happen. Below that, we see that we have the normal build stuff. We have a center with a column with a text saying counter over here, and in this, that's the first part of the column. The second part of the column it's actually this sized box for making some space, and then we have a row of a plus and a minus button, which we center on the screen using max axis alignment. And then we have the elevated button, which on pressed should call the increment counter method over here. So it will make a call to that one when pressed. So on press, it will call and it will add 1. It also has the text plus. And then we have a sized box in order to get some space in between them. And then we have an elevated button for decrement count with a minus in it. So we press minus and it will call this decrement instead. And that's how the state works. The thing that might be difficult is to remember to use the set state method. If we go back, we have this over here. It looks good with all the stuff. And there are a few things to think of when you talk about states. Set state will ask for a repaint. And that means that it is a good idea to keep the widget small. It will only repaint the current widget, and if that is the only widget, then the entire interface will be repainted. Don't call setState in the build method. It's better to have another method that you call in order to do the setState thing, because with too many rebuilds of the user interface, it will be possible to get slowdowns. But you might actually see examples of this on the internet, but it's much better to do as we did here, to call a method. So set state should be as small as possible. If this one has a lot of calculations, it could freeze the application. So keep it small, keep everything around it larger, but keep that one small. We haven't looked at async yet, but you cannot use set state with async because it will be, it will result in an error when compiling, so you can't do it. So basically async is asynchronous calls and part of concurrency, and set state is kind of a violation onto doing that, so you should just don't do that. There's also a method that's available for state widgets, which is called initState, and this one sets everything that we want to set before we start off with the tree and mount everything in the tree. So before everything is painted. And that's part of the life cycle of the widget. So it will call this initState, and it will set up things, fixing strings, formats, things, whatever it might be, before everything is shown. And the reason, well, it's a state thing, so there might be things that you want to do in this initState, but more importantly, you should not call setState. Don't call setState in initState, because that will mess things up. We'll have one additional example where we are going to copy text from an input field with a press of a button. And this simple example will show much of how text input is done. We'll make it simple and just use a string. Later on, we will use text editing controller in order to do this in a more robust way, but we'll make it easy. We'll see the on change for setting the variable, and then on press for the button. The on change is on the text field, and then the on press for the button that we are going to use. And let's move over to here, and I'll just find the code and copy and paste. This one will, as we will change the states, it will be forcing a we can actually stop because we will need a rebuild, and we seem to have lost some consts over there, and also a key constructor, and then that means that we will have a const over there, and a quick fix. Sorry, sometimes these things drop. All right, then it seems to be okay. Save this and we run it. And what's happening in this one while it starts up is that we have a copier, which is a stateful widget, has this create state, and if we look at the state, it has a text field value and a copied text, which are the basic variables that we're going to look at. The copy text method is the one setting state, and it will just copy the text field value to the copied value. In the build method, what's happening here is that we build up the user interface. We have a text field, which is where we can type text. And this one has this on change, which takes a value. That's the value that we have for the text field. And we call the text field value with the value, setting it directly like this. So the text field value will get the value that we currently have whenever we changed the text. And below that we have a elevated button, which on pressed we'll call the copy text, which was the one over here, which will copy to the copy text. And below that we have a text which will just print out the copied text like this. We have a copied text, that's the text over here, but beneath this, under here, we have this text which will show this as well. And that's basically it. We can now write some text over here. There's the keyboard if you want to, but you can also use the physical keyboard. May the force be with you. And then press to copy, and it copies down to this one. And that is actually how this works. We set the state over here in the copy text, which we call from the button, and we copy the text that way. And this is how good it could look as well. But that's it for now. It's been an introduction to how state works, but it gives you a good idea, and we'll continue working with state in coming lectures as well. But that's all for now. So until the next time, bye bye.